Welcome, everybody. This is a special edition humorous history podcast, and we are the Goofy Historians. This is to honor Women in History Month. This is drum roll. All right, let me introduce everyone. As always, from the left coast of the United States, we have Joseph, world-renowned statistician and scientist and Goofy historian. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Joseph.
Yeah, she's just an average statistician and scientist.
Average
but thank
statistician.
you. But yeah, I'm right on top of the bell curve.
Okay. All right. And we're very excited. We have an up-and-coming YouTube storyteller sensation, recent graduate from the East Coast of the United States, Haley Beckel, who is her own brand and likes to cook on her channel. Hi, Haley.
Hi, David. I don't know why I'm like a little bit nervous. This is, for me, I film in front of the camera. It's the same thing, but I still get nervous too because there's nobody around, but I still think I'm like gonna mess up. You say something wrong. I have to tell people to leave. I'm like, I have to be alone. So for me here, I'm like, oh no, now I have two people that are watching me.
Yeah, but we're just goofy, so it doesn't matter. Right. If we were serious, you could be nervous. But when you're two goofy guys, it's like, well, what's the difference? We're almost like we almost don't exist.
But anyway, I wanted to say thank you for joining us, and everybody listening, please subscribe to Haley's channel. It's amazing. For as young as she is, her body of work is prodigious in a good way. It's folklore, food, fashion. She's on both sides of the camera. She's just amazing. So her channel has almost 100,000 channel views. So go ahead and subscribe to that now. We'll wait. Okay, well, thank you, Haley. So for Women in History Month, we're going to talk about Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, we previously did a show on her, but we had to take it down because the audio was so bad, and we had some crazy theories, but it's basically a tale of a well-off peasant girl who basically saved France. And there's a lot of theories of how that could have happened. Joseph, do you want to talk about what was going on in the background now that the Crusades are over? France and England can go back to fighting each other.
Yeah.
But remember, we got to do this.
Yeah. We can. Yeah. So I don't even know if you can say if Joan of Arc saved France or actually created France. But we'll talk about that.
She didn't create France.
You can say that the French and the English per se
founded France. Huh? King Clovis founded France. I said Joan of Arc saved France.
No, there was no France. It was just a bunch of royal families. Yeah, it goes back to Clovis, but he was a tribe. He was a tribal king, right? But what I'm trying to say is there was no sense of nationhood until France, and until Joan of Arc. She was the one who saw the clear distinction between French and England, right? I have to remember, she saw very clearly that she was France and over there was English, but it wasn't that clear to anybody else except her and the Archangel Gabriel, right? The English at that time were not English. They spoke French, right? They owned 50% of France, right? And it was France originally that conquered England in 1066, right? So it's not as clear at all as Joan saw it. Everybody else saw it as the battle between the Plantagenets, who were French, were very French, they spoke French, they happened to also be kings of England, but that was almost an aside to them. They weren't that into being kings of England. They owned 50% of France, and they liked hanging out in France, and they never bothered to learn English, right? And then there's the Burgundians, who actually were another section of France near the southern section. And then there was the Valois, who didn't even control Paris anymore. A little part that used to be, one of the heirs going back you follow it backward to Clovis and them, but they were over, and they were mad as hatters, right?
They got crazy.
They were crazy. They thought one of the kings thought he was made of glass, right? Another king thought he wore, like, would you say he wore like a necklace of cats or something? And another, I mean, the final king, Charles VII, was completely schizophrenic, right? So they've been fighting, but the 100 Years started when finally one of the Dukes of Aquitaine, or the Dukes of Normandy, became a direct heir to the throne of France. So he was the next in line, right? He was going to become the King of France. And some of the people in France will says, "You're King of England, you can't be King of France." And they'll go, "King of England, shmooey, man, I'm the King of France." So that started the 100-Year War. But it wasn't like it was English versus the French. It was the French versus the French. It was a civil war, right? And the Civil War went on for 100 years. And then finally they came to a decision where the crazy schizophrenic Charles VII, after they lost the Battle of Agincourt. I don't know if that was the battle.
I love the Battle of Agincourt because that's when the
English. Right. That's where the English came and beat the shit out of the French. Right. Shakespeare talks about it, the Band of Brothers. So it was very popular from the English, right? Because that was the English thing. But that was like, a few years before Joan, right? And so Charles VII says, "Well, we give up, right? You kill all our royalty." And so what's going to happen is that the King of England, the Prince of England, is going to marry the Princess of France, just like a romance fairy tale. And then their heir would rule both peacefully, right? And all of the heirs of France from them would come from the female line, right? So Joan was actually going against her self-interest, right? As a woman, you would think she would, as opposed to Women's History Month, you would think that she would be supporting the French queen producing all the French heirs. But no, she was very conservative, and she felt, or God told her to feel, that it could only be a male heir to from this crazy Valois family to be the next king. So that's how the whole thing started. So the war was actually over until Joan comes along and reboots the whole thing.
I think that's the
start.
I think the main thing that got Joan all wound up was that the English had went and pillaged her village to begin with.
It wasn't even the English, it was the Burgundies. It was the Duke of Burgundy
aligned with
go into Domremy, her village, and burn the shit out of it, and she was pissed off. And her father, where everybody was pissed off in her little village. So I could imagine when Archangel Gabriel shows up and says, "Well, I want you to start killing your own enemies," why that would sort of ring true with her.
All right. So how in the world, it's just so unlikely. It's like you hear the story, everybody knows the story of Joan of Arc, but it's like something doesn't sound right. It's like, how? Why? How could that happen? That's crazy. How could a peasant girl, even if she was a well-off peasant girl, become a general and be successful at it? That's just nuts. It doesn't happen. So we're going to talk about the theories. And Haley had some crazy theories. I love some of your theories. Haley, what was that?
Yeah, let's hear some of the theories.
Let's hear some theories, because we've got our own.
Besides her just being a jihadist, right?
Yeah. So, first one, we can start out with something a little more, well, it's not necessarily plausible, but maybe you say, how did she lead this army? Maybe she was a secret military genius. Maybe this peasant girl just for some reason was blessed with this gift of the knowledge of combat. I don't know. You could, I know that maybe she just came through and she was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to tell these people what to do, these people what to do. I know that she was not really, some historians say that she wasn't really fighting on the front lines, so she was more just telling them what to do and giving them the action plans, and she was more of like a mascot as well and watching it happen. But I don't know, I mean, she also got wounded too, so she got an arrow to the shoulder and then a crossbow bolt to the thigh. So if she is like a military genius, would that happen? I don't know. I mean, it wasn't necessarily her being heroic. It was more so her just being there. So I don't know, but
I kind of agree with that, because at the end of the day, war is just like sales. It's like numbers, and she won. She was undefeated for a little while. She won
for a little
battle
while.
after
Yeah,
battle.
yeah. So I think I have a theory about that too. My own theory is that, as a jihadist, you know, she was a kamikaze pilot. And I think, I mean, what happened during the 100-Year War, right? Especially after they burnt off all their nobility, right? They were hiring mercenaries on both sides, right? And what do you do if you're a mercenary whose your job is to have a war? You want this war to continue as long as possible. And also, you don't want your own horses and your own, equipment to be killed, right? So the whole purpose of the 100-Year War is to keep these mercenaries employed, right? So it just sort of ground on forever, right? So what Joan did, and it was this whole thing, it was like French against French, right? I mean, it's easy for us now to think of the English. You can't think of it back then as the English as we think of the English and French as the French. It was all mixed up, right?
Right.
That's why I'm saying Joan of Arc created France as a nation. She's the one who said, we're French, you're English, get out, right? And they're going, but je suis français aussi, right? They're like saying, but we're French too. And she's going, no, you're not French. You made your choice. You made your
so
choice.
You're saying it's messaging. So she had the message that France needs to be independent, and that took hold. That's a completely different.
And that's like the first time that ever happened, because, like I said, that's why English has so many French words, right? Because all the nobility, they were all intermarried, right? The nobility were the French. It was all, everything was French, right? So at this time, she was the one who said no. She cut through the bullshit and said, you guys are English. You made your choice in 1066. Go back to where you came from. At this point, it's been 300, 400 years since 1066. Go back and leave Normandy and Aquitaine to us, right? Because that's what she was thinking. Get the whole thing back under French.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I'm not disagreeing with you, but you might be reading more into this. At the end of the day, she was 16 years old and she was a peasant girl. That doesn't answer
right. That's exactly my point. Was that she couldn't see the nuance.
Okay. Well, anyway,
she couldn't see like, oh well, these English are actually French, and the Burgundies are actually not. She thought that the people from Burgundy were English, right? And they were not English.
But here's my point. That's boring. That's history. There's something else that's more funny, because this is crazy. The pieces fell into place. No, the first time we started talking to this, because that doesn't answer the question. That's crazy. How could she do it? At first glance, I was like, she was super smart and she was a supermodel, and that's the only way these shit could have happened. But even that is lame. There's something more mysterious. And I think it has to do with she was a witch. Don't you think she was a witch, Haley?
Well, that's why they put her on trial, right?
Yes.
I mean, nobody doubted that she was hearing voices. I mean, we do now from the 21st century. She was either making this shit up, or she was actually schizophrenic, right? That she could actually hear voices, or someone was planting voices in her head, right? It just happens that the three voices she heard, Archangel Michael, Margaret, and St. Catherine, all had little pictures in the church she went to underneath flickering lights, right? So it kind of, you go, well, I could see her in church. It's cold and there's flickering lights, and she's looking at these frescoes of St. Catherine and St. Margaret, and all of a sudden she could hear voices, especially if she was eating mushrooms or something.
No, I'm not buying it. Okay, so I think she was.
No, well, why did it happen to be the three saints that were painted on her wall?
Okay, let Haley finish. Can you let Haley finish?
Okay, yeah, let's finish the Haley theory.
For the love of God, let Haley finish. Okay, so there was
Yeah, Haley
mushrooms.
finished.
No, okay. So
No,
Haley, what else?
I do agree with Joseph and the hallucinating part, because one of my theories was that she drank some rancid cow milk and
There
contracted
you go.
tuberculosis. Because I could plausibly see, I do think this could happen, that this 16-year-old girl, she's a peasant girl, okay? Well, she drinks some rancid cow milk, and then she starts believing, maybe, yeah, she's in church, she sees these these angels, and she's like, oh, okay, this is what I have to do. This is my mission. And then she goes out and she maybe is just so persuasive that she's convincing these people that this is what they need to do, and they're following her, but it's all just one big hallucination for her. And that I think would make sense why she would get injured as well, if she's not even on the front lines. You're just hallucinating the entire time. You don't know really what's going on. You get shot and you're like, oh no, oh well, it's fine. This is a part of my mission. Also, to go with your witch theory, so she was burned 3 times, which is very interesting, to be burned at the stake 3 times, not just once, but twice, and then a 3rd time.
I didn't even know that. How could that happen? The
The,
first one didn't take.
the first time, it's apparently she died from smoke inhalation, but did she? I don't know. Maybe not. Because then the second time, they burned her again, and they just wanted the body to be just completely gone, completely
I see.
dust.
Yeah.
And then her organs survived second time. So then they did third time.
Actually, that makes sense, because it's not as easy to burn a human body as people think, right? And what the English didn't want is relics, right? I mean, at that time, people really were into saint parts, right? I mean, so if they burnt her in her body, if she died of smoke inhalation, I mean, all the peasants would have come and like taken a nose and a finger, right? And even after they burnt all that, they would have gone after the intestines, right? So an intestine of Joan of Arc would have gone for like 500 shekels on the open market. So they had to, and after they burnt her, they took all her ashes and threw them in the river, right? Because they knew that just killing her wasn't enough. They had to destroy all her parts, so they wouldn't become relics and go on the relic market, right? Which was huge at that time, kind of like Pokemon or something today.
That is pretty interesting. So if she was, so she could have been. There's a lot of things she could have been. What else could she have been, Haley? She could have been an actual saint. We don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, she was in the same way. Like, look at. I mean, the way I see it too is like right after. You go back to Constantine, right? Where he saw the vision in the sky saying, "Under this sign you will conquer," right? At that point, to me, was the end of Christianity of Christ, and became the Christianity of Christ as the war god, right? You follow Christ because he makes you win battles, right? I mean, that was the only reason Constantine was converted, because he helped him win battles. Same thing with Charlemagne, right? And the same thing with Joan, right? The reason people followed her is because she won battles. Jesus was a war god, and that was the end of it, right? I mean, one of the things was that after she went to the Dauphin, the Prince of France, she had a vision that she was supposed to go to this church and get the sword, right? There was a sword buried under this church that she had to go. It was, and by that time, that was like an AK-17 or something. So it'd be like if a saint today said, "I'm going to march on the Capitol," and God gave me this AK, this machine gun to do it, right? I mean, who wouldn't follow him, right?
All right.
The whole point is to win, and she did win until she lost, and then that was it, right?
All right. So that's cool.
Is it cool or is it scary? Yeah.
I don't know, but we're talking about the theories, and the theories, we've got a lot of them, and you're so convinced that this totally makes sense. You like pieced it all together. You're like, this happened, and this happened, and that's how it happened, and it totally makes sense. I'm saying, nah, all that stuff happened, but it's crazy. It's crazy. Okay, so
well, I mean, one of the, also you have to say that Joan of Arc is one of the most documented persons in history until like the Abraham Lincoln, right? All her trials, everything. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of documents written on her at from both sides, right? Written in French. So when she was in trial, they originally started writing all of her documentation in French because they wanted to assimilate it. And when they realized, disseminate it, but when they realized that they weren't being successful, they started writing everything in Latin, so to keep it from the peasants.
That's awesome.
Anyways, that's a little aside. It's nothing to do with anything.
All right, so she could have been a military genius. She could have been a witch. She could have actually been a saint or a prophet.
Yeah, but she was. What I'm saying, she could have been a saint and a prophet, but she was the saint and a prophet of a war god. Her whole point was to win wars. It wasn't to bring, and to kill people. She wanted, and she's told the English, "You get out of France, or I'm going to kill you." It was as simple as that.
All right.
I mean, she was after blood. I mean, so if she was a saint, she was a saint of a war god. But she was very effective. I mean, she did get the English out. So there you go.
All right. So there's another theory. And this is a theory that Haley had that I had never heard of. And it's great. But it's not that great for the person who was the body, who they had to actually burn. What's the story about? It wasn't really her?
Yes. So this
wasn't really her. That's cool.
This is a theory that some people had come up with, and it's very controversial because it does kind of say that she isn't a saint and that this wasn't exactly real, because it's called the Joan of Arc affair conspiracy theory, and it was saying that Joan was actually the illegitimate child of a French queen consort of Bavaria, and that she actually didn't burn at the stake at all, and that the English had rescued her. And because that she was this illegitimate child of this French queen, she knew English very well. She knew these languages. She was very well educated, and that is how she got away. And then the English soldiers helped her escape, and then they lived happily ever after. But again, Joan did say that she didn't know an A from a B, so she wasn't she was a peasant girl. So you're like, what? How does that work? But if you do think about it, I mean, that is interesting, just to imagine this fact that she goes through this whole 3-year, journey, and she's doing all these things and being so controversial and cross-dressing, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, she actually gets away safely, and yeah, was there a body double? Was a body burned at all?
Probably somebody burned. There was a lot of witnesses, but if it was her or not, I mean, I've heard a similar theory that, well, one of the things is because, sort of about the hypocrisy. If she was a peasant, but as soon as she came to the prince, he made her and her family noble. He ennobled them for her to be able to lead the troops, right? And she took her nobility very seriously. So she was very hierarchical in that. But the theory is that I heard was that the Mad King, who was schizophrenic and he was like insane, his queen, right, married or had an affair with the Prince of Burgundy and had Joan, right? So Joan is actually noble. That's the only way they could comprehend that. A woman so intelligent and powerful, she had to be noble, right? And then to hide her, they farmed her out to this family in Arc, right, in order to protect, sort of like King Arthur, right? And then she got the sword. It was like she's almost like the French version of King Arthur, right? She was hiding, and then she came out, and she got the sword, right? And then she, kicked the English out of France. But I never heard about her not actually burning at the stake. But
all right, so that's a good theory. So what my theory is, and then we got to sum this up. The she was okay. So she was born in 1412, and she died in 1431. 1431 is the year that this guy was born. So I think that her spirit,
Maybe that's her son.
it could be her son, or maybe her spirit, and she was actually a
Reincarnated.
vampire. So what we want people to do is put, we're gonna actually put a little poll and or comments. What theory do you think, Joan of Arc? What do you think is the best theory? Was she a witch?
Okay,
Was she a
yeah.
vampire? And so what I was gonna say real quick here.
I want to say one more thing before we end. So
Okay.
give me 2 minutes. 1 minute. After you. Yeah. You can
No, go ahead, because I'm gonna sum it up.
Okay. One thing was we have to talk about her trial, right? By the English, right? So the English could not try her. There was no such thing as war crimes back at that time. So they needed, in order to, and you don't burn anybody but heretics. Only heretics get burned, right? And if she was noble at that time, she was noble, all they could do was cut off her head, but they wanted her burnt, right? Because they didn't want any relics hanging around, right? So they had to put her to not a civil, but a religious court. She was tried by the Inquisition, right? And they tried her for 4 different things. The only thing they got her on at the end was cross-dressing, because she dressed like a man, she wore her hair like a man, and she refused to put a dress on. Right? You know, and she's being judged by old men in dresses, right? Right?
She's being, and they didn't want her to dress like a guy, but they were dressed in dresses.
By these creepy old stinky men who are in these elegant dresses about her cross-dressing, for God's sake. And so that's what they got her on in the end, and that's why she burned at the stake. And the war didn't end with her. The war went on for another 20 years, almost another generation, right? But after the French finally won, right? So when the English were winning, the Inquisition went with the English, right? After the French won, right, they go, well, let's call back that Inquisition and retry her, right? And so a French pope comes and goes, no, she's actually a friggin' saint, right? So what would happen if the French hadn't finally won? Right? Would she still be a saint? I think not. It's political. Is that it? Are we done?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I thought we read out. I thought it stopped recording, but it's still recording. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah.
All right.
So that's my part of the hypocrisy, right? Is that how an Inquisition can change their mind after the other party actually wins.
All right, so please comment on what theory you think is the best. Haley, did you have any more theories?
The only other thing that I have heard is that she possibly was a man when you mentioned the cross-dressing, but I don't know. I mean, that's the only other thing, and it doesn't really go with women's history.
You know, they did check, right? Because the only reason she could become a captain was if she was checked for her virginity. Mm-hmm. So again, who knows? Somebody was checked for their virginity, right? Who knows if it was actually her? Just like who knows if it was actually? And there's no record of that virginity check, because apparently once you become an unvirgin, right, God doesn't talk to you anymore, right? Yeah, so that's kind of a bummer. Unless you're a man, then it's okay. But only virgin women get God to talk to them, or saints.
All right. Well, nobody knows, and now you don't know what you thought you knew, and then it was the age of exploration. So we're going to have one more stop before the age of exploration. We are going to talk about Vlad the Impaler. And so stay tuned, and thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to our channels and have a great day. Thank you.